Come on. There we go. Welcome to Slow News Day Live. My name is Steve Poikinen. I am here in beautiful Boulder Creek, California, where the flannel shirt is our state flag, the pit bull is our state bird, and cannabis is our state flower. I am joined this afternoon by returning guest and friend of the show and co-host of Consortium News Live, and hands down one of the best writers that we have going for us in this here time, Elizabeth Voss. Welcome back. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm great. Really glad to be here. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I appreciate it.
Of course. You've been putting out some incredible content both on CN Live and through your writing. Last week's episode, I mentioned to you, AI fascinates me and horrifies me all at the same time. You just told me who was going to be on tonight. If you want to share that with the folks at home, as it were, please do.
Sure. Yeah. Tonight on CN Live, we'll be speaking with Tim Canova, Nika, and Jared Knowles, the attorneys for the DNC fraud lawsuit. And I think it's going to be a really interesting show. We're going to talk about basically the prospect of election rigging in 2020, given the history that we've seen in the Democratic Party in 2016. And it's going to be really important to talk about 2016 because there's so much information that came from that election process and the primary process that we can't really expect to have come out again in 2020. We can't expect WikiLeaks to release another DNC or protest emails. We can't expect another DNC fraud lawsuit to happen. So 2016 in so many ways was very unique and informative in a way we just haven't seen before, and we really can't expect again anytime soon.
Well, that raises an interesting question. There's clearly a void in the kind of outlet that does, and WikiLeaks is still around, but the kind of outlet that does what they were doing up until that point and on through Vault 7 and Vault 8. Do you see another group of people sticking their neck out like that in order to make something happen out of, either altruism or I guess vengeance for Julian?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that WikiLeaks does what it can because it has whistleblowers and leakers come to it. You could answer it in the same way you would answer somebody accusing WikiLeaks of going after the DNC, which is, well, they didn't create the leak. They just published what they were given. So I think it's more a situation of, I don't know that we can expect that type of information to be leaked again from the DNC, no matter who it might go to. But I think there are some, whether you agree with the politics of Project Veritas or not, I think that organizations like that are doing kind of a good job pulling the rug out of establishment, entities and figures. So I think, that's another way of kind of guerrilla journalism trying to go after some unique stories as well. So that could be another potential, but I don't see another group doing exactly what WikiLeaks does. So no.
Project Veritas irks the shit out of me because they're so blatantly partisan, and they build up this thing about Epstein like it was going to just break the fucking world, and they come out and they're like, "You're never gonna guess what we figured out." A mainstream news outlet killed a story about a powerful figure. Can you believe it? In terms of hype versus reality, it was short. It was on delivery.
No, completely. And I think that their partisanship is a definite problem. But that type of kind of going undercover, so to speak, and trying to get full on tape, I think it would be another way, whether it's them or a similar outfit, that would be another way to kind of get that information out there. Whether that'll happen, I don't know. I don't think it's very likely, to be honest.
Yeah, and you raise a good point about it being less about the publisher and more about the whistleblowers. One, Bernard Jesus Sanders has said that he would stop prosecuting people. He would end the persecution and prosecution of whistleblowers under the Espionage Act. And that has led a lot of people to jump up and say, he's talking about Julian Assange, when in fact Julian Assange is not a whistleblower, he's a publisher. But what does that is? I mean, would that be a sufficient enough carrot for whistleblowers to breathe a little bit easier with this, I guess, promise?
I think it's a bit of a cop-out, obviously. I think it's something where he's trying to, I think he's trying to appeal to the people that are referencing the, quote-unquote CIA whistleblower. I hate in this whole Ukraine Gate situation, and I hesitate very much to even call that person a whistleblower. I don't think that works for the setting, but I think that that's what he's referring to. And I think he, in a very calculated, Bernie Sanders has been around in politics a very long time. I think it's perfectly within reason that he would be calculated in not being specific so that people could then take that to also refer to Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, even though, as we say, obviously Julian Assange is not a whistleblower, he's a journalist. So I think that was definitely the leeway. I think that leeway would have been intended to basically, as a cop-out, to give him an excuse, like, oh yeah, I've addressed whistleblowing. I've addressed that. I don't need to go any further.
And yet, when he was in the room and Ryan Grimm specifically mentioned Reality Winner by name, he immediately went to, I have no idea who Reality Winner is, don't know anything, and that's exactly what he did to Tim Canova in 2018. With right. Tim who? I've never heard of him. I didn't, knowing full and damn well that he appointed him to work on a committee with him.
Well, he endorsed him in 2016. Yeah. I mean, it's preposterous. So,
yeah. You have an article that came out in Consortium News like 4 or 5 days ago, and I want to pull that up on the screen, I think, and we can talk about it a little bit. But if you want to go into the background while I'm doing that, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Sure. So basically what I was thinking about was the way in which I was seeing a lot of, and this article was not intended to knock the supporters of Bernie Sanders specifically, but it was to say that we cannot expect any candidate that is truly progressive to receive fair treatment from the DNC ever, period. And I think that, it was important for me to look back at the history that we saw in 2016, as I said earlier, because it was a very unique situation that gave us hugely important information, whether that was that the DNC felt that it was its First Amendment right to rig elections, whether it was Bruce Beaver, defense counsel of the DNC, stating in court that they could have appointed anyone in a cigar smoke-filled back room, and it was basically just them being nice to us to let us feel like we had a choice. Whether it was basically arguing that the Bernie Sanders supporters knew that the election was rigged, and that meant that it was fine that that the DNC didn't go by its charter and that the funds were used, on and on and on. So all of those things, I do not expect us to see that again in 2020. And I think that it is too easy for people who have everything riding on Sanders because they are legitimately suffering and they legitimately need his domestic policies enacted. They want to put all their hope in him. And my point in writing this was to say, this is the reality we're working with here. Don't for a second think the DNC is just going to roll over and let Bernie Sanders or anyone else that's actually progressive win this race. It's just not going to happen, and this is why.
One thing killed me about that whole, Bruce Beaver's remarks. Technically, there's no such thing as a Democrat. It is what the DNC's lawyer said in open fucking court. There's no Democrats. We're a private company that, does it. And people have been running around honestly believing there's no way they'll be able to do it again this time. Like 2016 never happened. Like 2018 wasn't rigged as shit. Coming out of the 2016 election in the Unity Conference, they didn't make it harder for progressive politicians to win by committee. You know, oh, we're going to keep superdelegates. Sure, they can't vote on the first round, but I mean, really, what are the odds of there being a contested convention? I mean, golly, you'd have to run 10, 15, 20 people.
Shock.
They telegraph this shit. And my more conspiratorial friends believe that the elite have to express intent before committing a severe crime in open public, you know, and that's the way that they absolve themselves personally as well. I told you about it going into it. It was your obligation to know. But fuck, they made it blatant. They really did.
Well, I mean, even this week, I mean, after I wrote that article was, I believe it was it yesterday or the day before? There was, I think it was a couple of days ago. It was right after the article came out in Consortium News. An article was published by The Atlantic that argued, I'm not joking, for less democracy in primaries. It literally was titled, "Too much democracy is bad for democracy." I'm not joking. It wasn't a parody. I had to check it multiple times. Like, where is the satire? And it was too on nose to be satire. That's the thing. Even if it had been parody, it was too much. But it wasn't. It was like a very, very long article. And not only was it arguing for less power in the hands of voters in the primary process, it actually, in bold type in the middle of the piece, references smoke-filled back rooms. Literally references the DNC fraud lawsuit proceedings. Like, I'm not kidding. It was mind-boggling. So not only do you have Bernie Sanders supporters thinking that they're going to get it, you know, they can just beat the rigging this time, they can do it. And you don't have the DNC going, oh yeah, no, we're gonna do things fairly this time. You know, first of all, they defended themselves not doing things fairly the last time. This time, you have their media buddies coming in and saying, oh, well, we really shouldn't be doing things fairly. You guys don't know what's good for you. Democracy actually isn't the best idea. It's a failed idea. We've only really been trying it since the 70s. It was really a fail. They literally, I'm not joking, that is the language they use. They say this is a failed experiment.
Well, okay, they're not wrong. They're not, but the idea that we've really had any sort of representative democracy is a fiction that people like to throw around when it benefits them politically. The reason that Republicans and Democrats alike talk about we're going to get our country back and shit like that is because they need to hearken to a time that never fucking existed in this country, but that people who have been raised on and brutalized by propaganda their entire existences will allow themselves to develop an emotional or an imaginational attachment to this thing that never was.
Absolutely, no question. And I think that it's interesting too, because the article that I'm talking about literally says that the people that were the party insiders did a better job of selecting candidates in a primary process because, and this is the like punchline, because they were able to choose candidates that would have broad appeal. Not kidding. So that worked real well with Hillary Clinton. I mean, it literally, it's like they are self-parroting without the knowledge of how badly they are parroting. It's ridiculous, but yeah.
Will you send me that article, please?
I will. Yeah, it'd be great to actually look at it and share the screen with the audience because it's really unbelievable.
Okay, that would be kick-ass.
My typing won't be as audible.
That's all right. I'm gonna go back over to the Consortium article for a moment here, because there's an important, early on in the piece, the section about the social media manipulation.
Right. Yeah. That's another thing people don't talk about enough.
Yeah.
We talk about Russian social media manipulation. We don't talk about all the other types of social media manipulation that happened and that did happen in 2016.
It's phenomenal to me. And I mean, people have made light of the fact that there was only a couple $100,000 total spent by Russian troll farms on ads that appeared mostly after the election, or memes that appeared mostly after the election, or had absolutely nothing to do with politics whatsoever, but have ignored over and over and over again, not just David Brock, but fucking what's Sally Albright and Neera Tanden, and to a large degree, and now self-confessed Peter Dow. It's just they for whatever reason, even on the right wing, get a giant pass for this.
Yep, it's ridiculous, and I think that, well, and I mean, we had mainstream press before Hillary lost in 2016. The LA Times, the New York Times, they all reported on the operation run by David Brock and Peter Dow, Share Blue. They reported it with a $2 million operation. They were creating basically troll farms that were operated mostly by real people, but the people were paid to troll the opposition of Hillary Clinton and to create a false sense of consensus in support of Hillary Clinton, whether that was fighting with people who didn't like her or whether that was just being supportive of her. They were doing everything. And so the idea that it was somehow Russia that was the only party meddling in the election, there is no evidence they were meddling at all in this type of in this situation. But the idea that that was the only possible avenue of meddling is really preposterous. And I think that it's why, and this is why Russiagate, even though it's so lame, it's so obviously, conspicuously not based on fact, it nonetheless did work as a deflective tactic, because even though we did have press reports on Share Blue, we had press reports on these other types of social media meddling before the election loss, after the election loss, we didn't have any reflective discussion of that. We just moved on to writing about whether or not the Russians had hacked the DNC, whether or not the Russians had been meddling on Facebook and infiltrated our democracy and all of this ridiculous trash. And before she lost, it was fine with the LA Times and New York Times that Clinton had $2 million troll farms. And, they even say that the danger of that for Clinton's camp was that it was almost a confirmation of the fact that she had no organic support. They had to literally pay millions of dollars to make it look like she had any organic grassroots supporters out there. So my point being that was okay when everyone thought she would win. When she lost, everyone shut up about that immediately. So nobody kept talking about that. We all just moved over to, it was Russia social media meddling. That's why. I mean, just the $2 million alone spent on Share Blue dwarfs the alleged couple of $100,000 spent on Russia. So you're telling me that Hillary Clinton couldn't win with $2 million extra spent on this meddling, next to a couple $1,000s from Russia on ads that were spent on puppy ads after the election? Yeah.
Jesus arm wrestling Satan will sway the entire voting blocks of Midwestern countries. That's just science. I mean,
how can one argue against that?
When Jared Beck was on the show, we got in a conversation about manufacturing consent, Chomsky's book, and we concluded by the end of that episode that consent had been manufactured, and we now live in an era of manufactured confusion. And it's a testimonial to that when $2 million to David Brock is equal to, or is less than $146,000 or $200,000 in memes after the election. It's manufactured confusion when Bernie Sanders comes out and says, I will end the prosecution of whistleblowers under the Espionage Act, talking about a CIA agent. Specifically, the only person he referenced in that speech was the Ukraine whistleblower. And look, if you work for the CIA and the thing that you're blowing the whistle on isn't the CIA, you're not a whistleblower. You're following orders. And
exactly. It doesn't even, that's the thing. It's not about partisanship to say he's not a whistleblower. He literally does not fit in the definition of whistleblowing. It's just, that's a factual statement. That's not partisan at all.
It, but in manufactured confusion, facts are the enemy. Like, and we got, there was poll I read in Mint Press earlier this year. Like 72% of the country recognizes that the news is bullshit. It is
Well,
essentially fake news. Like
I mean,
almost three-quarters of the population.
and that's how Orwellian have we become when the war on fake news is actually a war on facts? And what does that tell you about how the public is viewed? The public is not someone that the establishment is trying to get on side. The public is the enemy. They are treating the public as if the public is an enemy country that they are trying to, basically wage psychological warfare on. And I think we can say that's been the case for decades. It's just more and more obvious now.
We've got documents that were given to the Intercept regarding the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, where Tiger Swan was specifically referring to the protesters as hostiles or enemy combatants. And this is filtered down into the police, where there's an us versus them mentality. If you're viewing your neighbors as hostiles, the enemy, and you're in some sort of position of authority or given permission by authority to act on their behalf. If your neighbors are the enemy, then it's an untenable situation. Full stop.
Well, it's a prelude to civil war. And I think, I'm not the only person to say that. I mean, you have people on CN Live, I think a couple of weeks ago, we had, the former UN weapons inspector, Scott Ritter, said that it was a different conversation, essentially said that he felt there was a real serious danger of the U.S. being driven into civil war. And I think part of that is, if you go into a whole other conversation about like the divide and conquer that happens on social media, where we're all, screaming at each other as if we're all the enemy, when, that's really not helping any of us. It's helping the establishment. But I think that in general, though, I think it's completely accurate what Jared was talking with you about in terms of the intentional mass confusion, intentional propagandizement, not to any specific point, but simply to keep people spinning and not paying attention to important actual information.
Yeah, if we're working our asses off, working multiple jobs, trying to do whatever we can to tread water, and the media that we consume is not Consortium News Live or Slow News Day or any of the other handful of truly independent outlets that are out there. They're setting themselves up to fall victim to somebody else's agenda and losing their own agency in the process and not being aware of it. And I think that's one of the most subversive tricks that our own government has played on us, is getting us to that point. It's just
Right.
it's fucking. And that kind of leads me into where I wanted to go with AI, because we're entering this era of pre-crime at the beginning of the year of 2020, where and I've done a couple of shows about this. We did a Free Assange vigil where we discussed this in some detail, but the prospect of an artificial intelligence at least finding keywords to what would be considered pre-crime and then passing that on to human agents is not in any way, shape, or form science fiction. It's a reality now.
Yeah, and it's a reality that we are getting closer and closer to. You see, I think China is sort of leading the way on that, unfortunately. They have an entire social credit system that's, hooked in with facial recognition, all sorts of really, really Machiavellian tactics. I think as far as like the discussions we've had on CN Live about AI, and the way that AI is then being used with big data by companies that no longer existing, no longer functioning, Cambridge Analytica, those types of situations, is really concerning. Well, and it's less about the kind of getting into your personal information to check if you're being subversive or a dissident. It's more about being able to selectively propagandize you and selectively tailor political advertising or whatever other messaging to your personality. So just saying, like, and as we did on CN Live, and also as basically Kathy Vogan and Lissa Johnson talked about, they were talking about the way in which you could be summed, basically distilled down into a couple of personality traits. Then you would be given specific messaging based on those personality traits. And it's really, really shocking and scary. But the parent company of Cambridge Analytica, who basically was funding a lot of this, works with, according to their own website, they work with military and corporations around the world. So it's not like from a specific country. It's an organization that is, I guess you could say, supplying this type of technology to basically every bad guy you could think of around the planet. So it's very worrying.
There's let's see. How do I want to put it? I think Lee Camp made the joke, but it was for us to, as a civilization, collectively fear an artificial intelligence or an automation just shows how fucking evil at the core. We all know the people who are implementing these things in testing stages and whether we want to or not, have become like that's there kind of should be a sort of Star Trek fully automated gay luxury space communism aspect to automation and to the thought of we get to redefine work now. And one of the things that I try to drive home on this show is community sustainability without government reliance, and doing whatever you can within that community to redefine work.
No, I think that's a great idea. And I think that type of on-the-ground activism, those types of things, are the most important thing that a person can do beyond speaking out and, obviously other online activism, sending letters to politicians. Those are all good things, like, especially when we talk about an issue like, let's say, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Those forms of activism I don't want to devalue at all. But as far as changing the quote-unquote system of that is all around us, that we live in on a day-to-day basis, I do think that it's most important to be involved in your community, to be taking part in activism in your community, working together. And if we don't stop waiting for somebody like Bernie Sanders to save us, then we are just going to be taken in by the next guy. We have to stop waiting for a person to come in and change things for us. Unfortunately, a lot of people, and you mentioned this earlier, but a lot of people, when they are working 3 full-time jobs and they have no money to survive anyway, there are people working full-time, they're homeless, and that type of situation, there is no extra time, energy, or funds to do political activism. And that, I think that's very intentional. I don't think that's an accident. But the problem is those people rightfully so look to Sanders, and they want that type of politician to enact the policies he promises because it would help them so much. And I have I completely agree with them on that point. But they have to, and for those people to realize that Sanders is controlled opposition, essentially, or for them to realize that he will never be allowed to enact those policies by the DNC, and that there are 20 different ways that they have made sure that will never happen. I think a lot of them could not handle it. I mean, I see people on Twitter all the time with horrendous stories about what they're living through, literally stating Sanders is my only hope. And I worry for those people when they actually see him cheated again and realize that he's not going to be able to save them. The end point has to be that we realize we have to save ourselves. I don't know what that's going to look like, and but my only point is that is the reality that we're living with. And the sooner, as painful as it is, the sooner that more of us realize that, the sooner some actual change might start to happen. But we're not there yet.
You're 100% right, and I can't stress enough that we're all on a journey. We're all taking a walk here, and there were a lot of people who, like you and like me, after 2016, were like, shit, man, this guy was my absolute compromise candidate in the first place. And after he folded like wet cardboard and rolled over and spread cheeks for Hillary Clinton, I can't in good conscience support this man any further. And that's
Right.
not to say that he doesn't have good policy positions. He has some fantastic policy positions. It's not to say that Bernie himself is a horrible person. I feel like he's been completely compromised. That's something that you know, I would expect most people to do in that situation. What I fault Bernie Sanders for is playing along with it and continuing to milk these guys for millions of fucking dollars in terms of donations from people who can't fucking afford it in the first place, but as you said, are putting 100% of their hope into this man. And it's sad to witness, because we should all collectively fucking know better at this point, Elizabeth. We should.
Right. Well, and if you, and the sad thing too is, I genuinely worry about some people who put their hope in Sanders, and if they don't see him become the nominee, I really like it. I genuinely think there are people out there who are putting basically their entire lives on him. And I'm of the exact same position on Sanders, in the sense that I don't think that he intends to be a terrible, like intentionally devious person. But I do think that what he is doing is unforgivable to people, in terms of selling them false hope, taking the money of people that are homeless or hungry or unable to almost afford rent, and then handing it over to the DNC, knowing that's what's going to happen, knowing that he's going to turn around and ask those same donors to vote for the Biden, Warren, Kamala, whatever appointed, nominee we see. That he knows that's what he's going to do, and he's taking their donations anyway, and that's what I can't forgive Sanders for. But and I think that whenever I talk to people, whether it's people that are not in public life as far as journalism and activism, but were close to the Bernie campaign, or were very, very active in 2016, or whether it's people that are independent journalists and people around those cases, everyone who really was up close and personal in 2016 that I know, that I'm in contact with, for Sanders and all of that, they've turned around and they are either against voting entirely, and they think that it's a charade, or they're for Tulsi. None of them that I know of are for Bernie anymore. And I think that either way, it's just interesting to see that.
That little fucking grifter Nick Brana is still for Bernie. That guy is. But he's making money off of it, so for someone who consistently touts third parties, I have seen him advocate for Bernie Sanders for the last 3 years, and I have a Nick Brana story. In 2015, I helped co-found a thing called the Progressive Independent Party with Eric L. Bloss. In 2018, Tim Canova ran as a progressive independent.
Yeah, we haven't even started talking about that. That's a really important story. But yeah, don't let me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and we can get to it. But we had our platform that I wrote 90 to 95% of, and then it was tinkered around with by committee, and flash forward to 2017, and Nick comes out with an official platform for Movement for a People's Party, and he didn't even bother to change my words in places. Like, it was pilfered directly from the Progressive Independent Party, it like it, and not they didn't go to the website and copied it. It was at one of the convergence conferences where him and Arikel were like trying to form a partnership,
Right.
and trying to form a coalition movement and expand on all of this energy, because it was very, very clear that this is in the early stages of the DNC fraud lawsuit, where all of this information was just starting to come out. And there were people who had just thrown up their fucking hands and were like, I'm done with it altogether, who we felt could be instrumental in providing the energy for a legitimate third-party movement. So all of this happens, and then Nick goes on Jimmy Dore's show and starts repeating my platform to me as the viewer. And I was like, how in
That's incredible.
the
Well, if
fuck?
that hasn't been written up as a story somewhere, it needs to be. That's insane.
If I cared more, I would make more hay out of it. I would, but I'm not. I'm not involved in the Progressive Independent Party. I do call Nick out on his bullshit when I can. It's just there's nothing legitimate about that guy. Like, nothing,
Yeah.
dude, nothing. Like, he didn't even have the position in Bernie's campaign that he tells people he had.
Well, politics is a magnet for sociopaths, psychopaths, and power-hungry narcissists in general. So, I'm not calling anyone any specific names. I'm just saying that it is a magnet for that type of personality, unfortunately. So you have people that really do want to make a difference, really do want to help, and they are usually cannibalized by those other types of personalities. And anyone who's risen to any sort of real position of power almost is guaranteed. And Caitlin Johnstone, Independent Journalist, does a great job of describing that better than I ever could. But she does a great job of talking about why the system, the structures of power we have, really favor those people. So they get to the top almost always.
Well, yeah, the exact same traits that people get, Thorazine for in some cases.
Right.
People are lauded for and looked up to, and it's really like that comes down to whether or not they benefit the system by being a sociopath.
Well, and which family they're born into, and whether they're wearing a suit sometimes is a lot of it. But
Absolutely. If you want to circle back to Tim Canova, I'm happy to do that.
well, just to say, because it was part of the article on Consortium News, and I think it's an important third aspect when we talk about the outright cheating of Bernie Sanders revealed by the DNC leaks and Bethesda emails. So that's something that most people remember, even if they don't want to think about it, they do know about it. Then we also know that most people who are really watching the Sanders campaign in 2016 do remember the DNC fraud lawsuit. But a lot of people wouldn't, unless they're avid watchers of your show, avid consumers of independent media. A lot of people wouldn't really connect Tim Canova with these other things because it was a congressional base. But it is critically important to talk about his races against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because she was the single individually named defendant in the DNC fraud lawsuit. Obviously, she was the DNC chairwoman who was the basically the boss of cheating Bernie. So to run against her is running against one of the most corrupt political individuals in the country, in one of the most corrupt areas of the country. And so his races show that. His races against her demonstrate the underbelly of American politics and just how rigged and overtly corrupt it is. And when you look back at his 2016 primary, they at least cheated him in such a way that it looked close. Yeah. Whereas when you look at 2018, they capped him at 5% of the vote.
5% across the board.
Yeah, it was almost a blatant fuck you written in numbers. I mean, honestly, that's what it was. And so that's why it's important to talk about, because Brenda Snipes, the election supervisor who illegally destroyed the ballots from his first election result, she was never prosecuted. Under GOP authority figures, she kept her job until 2018. She was only forced to resign or was removed from her position after 2018, and only because other races were impacted that got nationwide press. So it is his races reflect the madhouse that underpins the DNC, the most central figure in the corrupt DNC. And also, Debbie Wasserman Schultz at her role in the Awan scandal was never prosecuted.
Never.
And why is that? Now, why is that none of that, and so she is the most central figure, I think, in the corruption of American politics, at least in terms of the DNC aspect of it. And I'm not saying that there aren't corrupt Republicans. I'm just talking about us, those of us who are progressive, who want to see progressive politicians flourish and actually represent their constituents. People like Debbie Wasserman Schultz are the people that are really stopping that, not directly the GOP. Although, as I said, they did enable completely Brenda Snipes to continue to prop up Debbie Wasserman Schultz. They were not coming in and against her. And Tim Canova has said multiple times, I believe, that basically what it showed was that it's not two different parties against each other. It's the money party with two different faces. So I think that's the truth, unfortunately.
It's Enterprise moving trucks,
right,
getting shoved full of ballots.
Yep.
With no secondary, notary signature, no witness, no police escort or anything like that. Ballots, boxes and boxes of ballots being found in janitors' closets. This is, third world tin pot dictator shit.
Exactly what I was going to say. That's what we expect from those types of countries. From developing nations, with governments that are being either propped up or overthrown by the CIA. That's what we expect that from. And I think that I don't know, it's kind of like beyond, even as someone who works with words quite a bit, it leaves you speechless after a little while. I mean, it really does. And I think that, the blatant illegality of it, even though it was, unaddressed, Brenda Snipes has still not been prosecuted. The fact that she wasn't prosecuted, the fact that we have evidence of all of this is a credit. And again, that's the type of information that there's no telling if we'll get that or not coming out into 2020. We don't have any guarantee that somebody like that Tim Canova will run again, or that someone like him will run again. And so that's why the entire 2016 through 2018 period was extremely unique. And that's Tim Canova's races are one part of that. I also want to add that one of the things, because I know that a lot of people have seen the video, if they watch Nico House's video that he put up of the ballots being improperly and illegally transported. But one other thing that I thought was really interesting that not a lot of people picked up on in the wake of Tim Canova's 2018 race was there was video and images of a woman bringing extra campaign literature to polling places on the day of the election. And obviously it's illegal to bring, campaign literature to a polling place. You're not allowed to have that material there. But my question, and this is a question, not a statement of fact, my question is, how do we know that those weren't ballots? I mean, obviously they're not going to go in there and actually stick up campaign literature in the polling place. So to me, so what I'm saying is there is evidence of potentially those fake ballots being literally, do you need any more of these fake ballots in the name of, do you need any more campaign literature? So I just think that's an important point.
A buddy of mine down in LA, who I can't say his name because he asked me to remain anonymous in the retelling of this story, but he was working for a scriptwriting factory in Hollywood that was ran by a gentleman who had worked with the DNC for 25, 30 years, who he wrote, my friend was part of the team of writers that wrote the 4 acceptance speeches for the final round of potential vice presidential candidates way before the convention. So they already knew that no matter what, it was going to be Hillary Clinton. She was narrowing down her short list of VPs, and I can't remember who the 4th one was at the moment, but besides Tim Kaine, it was Elizabeth Warren and Andrew Gillum. Now, he, during the course of the 2016 election, was working for campaigning on behalf of Bernie Sanders, working in a field office for him. But at work, they would watch in real time as the fraud was developing and ongoing. They started to look at polling places. And if you went to your county's website and it gave you a list of polling places, and you went to Bernie's website and it gave you a list of the polling places, they were the same polling places. If you went to Hillary Clinton's website, there were additional polling places.
Wow.
Polling places that did not necessarily exist other than that day to pad ballots for Hillary Clinton.
Wow.
I don't know if it's possible to go back in time and recover that. I don't know whether it's been altered or not.
I'm sure they would have scrubbed it by now.
But
but that's incredible.
This is shit they witnessed in real time and raised to a few people who were like, don't ever talk about that. You should probably forget that you saw all of that. And if that's happening at a federal level, it is damn well happening at a state level. And
Absolutely.
and it just goes back to the 5% across the board. It is
exactly
statistically impossible for that to happen. Tim's got an anecdote for that, but the crux of it is that's an anomaly that you can't figure out. And
right.
I'm also pretty sure if you were to take 3 5s, you could somehow shape a middle finger out of it. I think it is a giant fuck you to Tim Canova. I think it's a giant fuck you to the people who live in Miami or in Florida's 23rd district. And more so, it's an advertisement that they can get away with this shit. And it can go down.
We are untouchable.
Yeah. It could, people can share the video of, ballots getting shoved unescorted into a truck. People can talk. Tim can go on, and all that does is infuriate a handful of people on the left who have decided that they can't like Tim Canova anymore because he said something bad about Bernie Sanders. Like, they're not realizing that they can do this again. That there were no repercussions whatsoever for 2016 or 2018. As you said, Brenda Snipes, not in jail. You mentioned...
barely even out of the job.
Yeah.
Only because she pissed off other races and other people, people that were in other races, is she out of the job.
And she's
That's
like
it.
3 weeks younger than baseball. It's not like she wasn't headed for retirement soon anyway,
Yeah.
No, I'm not age shaming. I'm not. Just want to make that perfectly clear. If you're, sensitive about that kind of thing, and not shaming her for being old. I'm stating that in terms of approaching retirement age, she was there. That's it. Don't read into it,
Right.
please.
No, I totally understand. I think it's interesting too, because I think when you look at Debbie Wasserman Schultz as a phenomenon, I think that it's, and again, you can get more or less conspiratorial about this, but I think it is important to talk about the Awan scandal just because of what it showed. That her staffers would have had, essentially, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say they would have had blackmail on almost everyone in Congress, at least especially the Democratic members of Congress. So the idea that isn't useful to Debbie Wasserman Schultz in not being prosecuted or in not being, thrown out of Congress, I think that has to be remembered. That's maybe potentially one reason that she feels so untouchable, and why the 5% middle finger wasn't, was very intentional and blatant in a way of just saying you cannot do anything to stop us.
For the viewers who may be unfamiliar, could you please give a little bit of background on the Awan Brothers and the Awan scandal?
Sure. It's been a long time, and nobody's really talked about it for a couple of years now. But essentially, IT staffers working for Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the Awan brothers, both Pakistani, and they, actually, I think that their families went back to Pakistan when this kind of scandal broke. They essentially were being paid millions of dollars to just do IT work. It was revealed they were also essentially collecting information, breaking into the iPhones and all sorts of other devices of members of Congress. They, at least one of them was arrested under trying to commit bank fraud, I believe. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz continued to defend them. A long story long, there was basic accusation that they were selling information to the Pakistani intelligence. We don't know that, but in the midst of it being potentially, beginnings of prosecution, Trump's DOJ under Jeff Sessions refused to prosecute the Awan scandal. They dropped the case. And it was fascinating because the person who would have been the one prosecuting the case, I read into it here, was so upset, I imagine, they didn't even show up to court on the day they announced they were going to prosecute. Somebody else had to come in and say that day. I mean, because can you imagine being the prosecutor of the Awan scandal and being told you to stand down on that? Anyway, so basically nothing happened, and it shows you the bipartisan powerlessness of anyone to prosecute these people.
Not only that, but Debbie Wasserman Schultz's brother.
That's the next point. Yes, go right ahead.
Explain
that.
It's he was part of the he was part of what? No, actually, I know he's involved, and I can't remember why. But
he's a prosecutor. He's a prosecutor in Washington.
Yeah, and he was linked to, or he was supposed to be the one prosecuting them, right? That was.
I don't know if I don't think
or
it
was his office.
But he commented on it. Yeah, he's probably, and he sent out a tweet basically saying it was fake news. There was no big deal to it. But the inference is that he had played some role in protecting Debbie because of, through helping to shoot down the Awan prosecution. I don't believe there's any evidence to show that he was telling people to, stand down behind the scenes. Or I think that the fact that he is a prosecutor at that level is a concerning conflict of interest, to put it mildly.
Yeah, well, it's like having Comey's daughter as one of the prosecutors out of the Department of Justice that was going after Epstein. There's,
right.
All sorts of nefarious incestual tentacles that kind of keep this oligarchy afloat. And when Bernie Sanders gets robbed, I think that there's an opportunity for people to kind of come together and basically, finally have a protest in this country that isn't a parade.
I hope so. But I also think the danger is, I think the time for that was after 2016, because I think 2016 is when we had the evidence for it. And I think the problem that I see about 2020 is I think that people would rather console themselves and say he lost fairly. And I think without the blatant evidence that he's cheated, I think they'll just say, oh, well, my gut tells me he was cheated, but surely not. I don't think there will be that outrage that we did see at the convention in 2016. We did see people angry and silenced by the DNC and holding up signs for WikiLeaks revealed the corruption of the DNC. If that didn't do enough, then I don't know what will. And I think anyone who's still clinging right now to the idea that Sanders is genuinely going to fight for them to the end and he's going to stand up to his supporters being cheated, they're delusional. And I hate to say that because I'm not saying that they're bad people or that they intend to be delusional or that they're intending to lie to themselves, but it's really easy to do that the more you need something to be true. It's easy to do that. And you do that, people do that in relationships, they do it in politics. It's very, very common, and it doesn't say anything particularly negative about your intentions, but it's the most damaging to yourself. It's damaging to those people more than anything. And it damages any ability for a real movement towards change to really get started and get momentum.
What's particularly gross about it is that the people who you just described feel guilty themselves for not doing enough for Bernie Sanders in 2016 and are now working harder, leaving jobs, sleeping on fucking floors in other towns and shit just so they can go out and give more of themselves to a politician running as a Democrat for the 2020 nomination. You know, the disconnect is, I've said for a while now that the pathway to neoliberalism starts with picking a Democratic candidate for president and then spending the next however many weeks, months, or years justifying their shitty choices and decisions and words. And the emotional investment that people have placed into Bernie Sanders and the idea that tinkering marginally around the edges of capitalism is a sustainable path for an equal and in general, you know, transformational future, I think would be much better served gardening.
I agree with that statement, actually. I really do. And I think helping to feed your neighbors and your neighbors, that type of movement I think that's exactly right. And I think that it's unfortunate that so many people are, it's not even selective amnesia. It is elective amnesia. They're electing to forget. They want to forget. And that's the reason that I wrote that article. Because I don't want people to just sort of gently go into that night of another 2016, but without the evidence, telling themselves that it was, not rigged or whatever. It's too much. I think that the sacrifices of people like Canova, the sacrifices of Jared and Elizabeth Beck in fighting that lawsuit, the sacrifices of, whoever it was that leaked the DNC and Podesta emails.
Seth Rich.
Those things should not be wasted with that type of amnesia. That's why it's important to look back on that, because we won't get that again.
Well, and we stress heavily on the Free Assange vigils, and please come be a vigil guest sometime. We would love that.
Okay.
And Joe did.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. A while ago. Yeah, he was great, fantastic. But we stress heavily that Julian Assange doesn't have the time for someone to get inaugurated in 2021.
Right.
He doesn't have the time for Bernie Sanders to dance around ever having to say his name out loud. And this carries down to Bernie's entire team, including David Sirota, including Bree Gray, including other journalists who fucking know better.
Exactly.
Who can't say the man's name out loud because, oh no, how would the media react? Well,
I'll tell you why. They also, their excuse for Sanders as well is, oh, well, if they do that, then he's making excuses for the Russian hacking Putin puppet that got Trump elected. So therefore, he's an alt-right winger and is a Putin troll himself. I mean, if he says a word that if he says a word on it, he'll be called a Russian or whatever. And the thing is that Sanders doesn't have to do anything to be insulted and attacked by the media unfairly. He already is. So what's the difference? I mean, the difference is at least Tulsi, and I'm not saying that I think that Tulsi will be any less cheated than Sanders, but at least Tulsi is able and has the spine to actually call out some of this for what it is, to stand up for Assange and Chelsea Manning. That doesn't mean she'll be fairly allowed to become a nominee or president at all, but at least she's calling out the rot in the Democratic Party for what it is, and I congratulate her on that. I mean, applause to that. So
yeah, no, I have I like a lot of what Tulsi Gabbard says and does, and I dislike a lot of what Tulsi Gabbard says and does. But I think that
fair enough, completely. Yeah.
if she's done anything throughout this presidential primary, it has been to be the lone voice of support within anyone running for president in either of the two parties, not discounting Adam Kokesh and Ian Schlachman, who's now no longer running for president. But the Greens in general seem to be all right with Julian Assange. She's the only one that's ever said his name in a real, delivered a fact out loud about him. Bernie Sanders waited 44 days after his arrest before he made a general statement about President Trump, and
Epic.
if it takes you 44 days to calculate that decision, can we really expect you to sign an executive order on day one commuting his sentence, freeing him?
No.
If he in fact makes it to that, which, God hope he does.
Well, if he does, if Bernie Sanders does make it to the Oval Office, it will be at the price of his integrity, 100,000%. It will be as a neoliberal. That's the only way he gets in, unfortunately. But
I
there
love
is
you
one,
for saying
yeah, go
that.
ahead.
No, I thank you for saying that out loud. I couldn't agree more.
And I think too, when you look at the way that Trump, even Pompeo, but especially Trump, praised WikiLeaks on the campaign trail, and then turned around and said later, when he's president, oh, I don't know about WikiLeaks, and how Jeff Sessions turned around and was like, they're arresting Assange is our priority, et cetera, et cetera. I think, it doesn't take a genius to work out the degree to which anybody who becomes president has to obey the orders of the security state. And I think that, regardless of anybody and their personal opinion about Assange, once you become president, I don't think, unless you want to be another JFK, I don't think you're able to step out of line. And I think that's what you see. And I'm not fan of Trump. I'm not saying that that I'm agreeing with him in any way, but I think watching the way that he turned from I love WikiLeaks to I don't know what WikiLeaks is, I don't know anything about it, I think that's evidence of that. I think it's you just, the person that campaigns is never going to be the way that they govern. And even if it's not intentional, it's not going to be the way that they govern.
That's solid fact right there. I've raised this before with a couple of different people on the show, that it would freak me out more if Bernie Sanders made it through the primary completely unscathed and was delivered the nomination on a silver fucking platter to go on and destroy Donald Trump. That would scare the shit out of me because of what it suggests.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I see your point. I agree. I think that there would be, on a number of fronts, it would obviously be better than Trump. But I also think that anything substantive that people would have worked so hard to get Bernie into office for, they would be delivered like a Frankenstein version of what they wanted. That would be a neoliberal version. And it would not be the same thing. I mean, whether it's Medicare for all or any other promise, it would not be what they want it and need it to be.
Well, not only that, but in my mind, I think that the economy would be allowed to be artificially floated until his very first act or piece of legislation or executive order got passed. And then they would deliberately tank the economy to show what happens if someone dares whisper we should do something for the working poor of this country.
Absolutely. I've been waiting for them to make, have another crash to try and get Trump out of office. It hasn't happened yet, but I've been waiting for it to happen. I think they're trying with Ukrainegate right now. And again, with Ukrainegate, it's obviously and unashamedly another Russiagate, and it's hilarious how blatantly obvious, overt, and shameless they are in projecting whatever they've done onto somebody else. We have to fight about whether that somebody else did or did not do what they're accusing them of. For example, the corruption of Joe Biden and his son is obvious. Then they projected it onto Trump, and we're supposed to argue about whether Trump was corrupt or not. It seems to be the one thing we can predict in politics 100% of the time is that dynamic of prediction and deflection from real corruption.
That's brilliant analysis right there. I did pull up that Atlantic article. I don't know how much time you have. If you,
I have another hour, so that's fine.
oh, kick ass. Well, let me know when I'm taking up too much of it, and we'll do, because I know you have a show tonight, but I'm going to, I'll do it on share screen.
Yeah, we start, and so as a shameless plug, we start at 8 Eastern.
Oh, no, shamelessly plugged, dude. That's fine. You have a fantastic show in CN Live, and you guys continue to do, like, just really some of the best live journalism that we have. It's good stuff.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And so does Susie with her weekly teach-ins. If you guys aren't watching the show, if you're not watching One versus Five Eyes on Susie Dawson's YouTube channel or Graham Elwood's occasionally, go do that. It's it's night school for people who give a damn. I feel like. But okay. Americans who turned into the first presidential debates this summer beheld a spectacle that would have struck earlier generations as ludicrous. A self-help guru, a tech executive, both of them unqualified and implausible as national candidates, shared the platform with governors, senators, and a former vice president. Excluded from the proceedings, meanwhile, were the popular Democratic governor of a reliably Republican state and a congressman who is also a decorated former Marine. This is kicking off the article about too much democracy is bad for democracy.
Bad. Yeah. I mean, that title really does say it all. I mean, I looked so many times for where this was satire or, parody, but unfortunately it's not. So, I mean, as I said, it's the logic of this is ridiculous. It's like, I mean, no democracy in the Democratic primary gave us Hillary. That went real well.
And people are clamoring for someone basically ideologically Hillary, but who tests a little bit better.
Right, of course.
And whether that's, fake Native American Hillary or salad comb Hillary or gay South Bend mayor Hillary or, whichever version of Hillary they're going for. There's also ancillary rumors that Hillary will be a vice presidential pick and or running.
Yeah, no, that was one of the things I was going to ask you about is what you think, because I think it's very likely that they'll pull her in, even though it's too late already, or even after it's become too late. I think they'll pull her in anyway, because I think she owes too much for the quid pro quo that she's been given. I think that she has too much money that she hasn't been able to pay back in political favors. So
that's interesting. I think that they would. I think that once it becomes clear that Joe Biden has fully achieved cognitive decline in real time in front of, an American television or international television audience, and they stop donating to him, and they're looking for someone reliable where they can park their money, I think that would be about the time that Hillary would waltz in. Certainly before Super Tuesday, but after at least Iowa and New Hampshire.
Right. Yeah. And I think also about this article, I think if you get, for anyone who feels that they may get into the weeds a little bit as far as the way that this article talks about the primary structure and the history of it, I think a good counter to this gaslighting bullshit is the What Happened to Bernie Sanders book, and this is a shameless plug of Jared Best's book, What Happened to Bernie Sanders. You need to read that to understand the way that the Democratic Party has rigged the system so that it's not just outright, ballot destruction or fake ballot. The structure of the way the primary system works in the Democratic Party is such that no progressive will ever be able to get the nomination. And to understand that, you really do need to read this book. Like, I read it. It was, it really helped shape my understanding of how hopeless that is. And you need that understanding in order to then, move forward. You can't sit there putting your hope on something that is terminal. And if you actually want to make some change and move on, like, you have to be able to let go of that bullshit when you know, in fact, but you can only do that when you know that it's bullshit. And so, this article tries to gaslight the reader into thinking that there's actually too much, voter power in primaries somehow, and that's a bad idea.
Restoring the old era of smoke-filled rooms is neither possible nor desirable. It feels like there's a but coming. It does. And this is one of the more condescending sentences that I've read in a little while. Primaries bring important information to the nominating process. They're pre-selected candidates. What it does, primaries are for fundraising and marketing and test marketing, and we know that. But yeah, they test candidates' ability to excite voters and campaign effectively. Points of entry for up-and-comers and neglected constituencies force candidates to refine their messages and improve their stamina. But as 2016 made clear, there's the but, primaries are only half of a functional nominating system. The other half is input from political insiders and professionals who can vet candidates, steer them to appropriate races, and as a last resort, block them if they are unacceptable to the party or unfit to govern. Wow.
Why didn't they stop Hillary?
I mean, she basically purchased the DNC, and we know that. Like, that's another thing that people forget, is that the DNC was nominally broke when Barack Obama left office. Or, going into the 2016 election, he had drained that shit dry by maintaining a payroll of full-time consultants, optics people, writers, a lot of people who are part of the Atlantic Council now. And Hillary Clinton was able to swoop in and not only control the flow of money through the DNC all the way down to down-ticket races, individual state house races, but she was able to entirely influence the way that people got to vote, where they got to vote, how they were getting their information to a degree, certainly. And then, as you mentioned in your article, how people were able to access Donald Trump so easily through the Pied Piper strategy.
Right. And I mean, the role of the media in that is critical. And that's one of the things that we did learn from the DNC leaks and the Podesta emails as well, is the degree to which the DNC, meaning the Hillary Clinton camp and the Hillary Clinton campaign, were working directly with the media. Whether it was in direct benefit of Hillary Clinton or whether it was, as you say, elevating Trump in the early, in the GOP race as a Pied Piper candidate. And you see Jimmy Dore make fun of that all the time. She couldn't even beat her own, straw man. She couldn't even beat the guy from WWE wrestling that was supposed to be the heel that she could slap down easily. So,
which is amazing because he's actually in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Exactly. Exactly.
And people act, and we've talked about this before, but people act like the Q people and fucking diehard Trump supporters act like the dude isn't an actor, isn't a freaking television game show host, doesn't know how to fucking work a crowd, doesn't have hundreds, if not thousands, of lawsuits from his contractors that he stiffed. And there's a blue-collar element that loves Donald Trump that just won't accept that he doesn't pay his fucking workers.
Yeah, we'll see. It's the exact same dynamic you have with Bernie Sanders. Sanders and Trump are both loved by populist movements, but neither of them have integrity towards that populist base. Neither of them are going to fulfill what that base wants. So the interesting thing will be what happens when both of those bases realize they've been shafted. I mean, truly, like, what happens when that... I don't know if it'll be the same kind of reckoning that Sanders supporters will have when he's cheated again. Because obviously, Trump will either be reelected or he won't be. But I don't know that Trump supporters will really wake up to the way that they've been screwed over by Trump, when he leaves office in whatever way he does. I don't think it'll be that kind of like slap in the face wake up call. But regardless, I mean, I agree with, Trump was a Democrat until a few years ago. Trump, is, as you say, he's an actor. He is somebody who, is a cartoon character meant to be hated and that a lot of people latched onto. And I think it is really sad that a lot of working class people think that he's going to fight for them when he's a billionaire and part of the plutocratic class. I think that, if anything is brilliant about Trump, it's the way that he's been able to appeal to the working class that he's never been a part of.
Well, and really, that's television, baby.
Yeah,
exactly. It is. He had a #1 rated show or top rated reality TV show. What he is a guy who is running the White House, or at least was trying to at the very beginning, and certainly while he was candidate Trump, but running a campaign in a White House as if it was the set of a reality show.
Well, doesn't that reveal to us the degree to which politics is a reality TV show?
God, I fucking hope so.
I mean, yeah, I think the other thing though about Trump is that I think, he, how do I say it? I think the best way to put it, I can imagine, is to say that I think rather than Trump, I think some people in the working class did really latch on to him. I think some racists latched on to him. Some people who wanted to punch back after Obama was president. That element was there. Yeah. But I also think that the major thing was that I think I would say literally 90% of the country is united in hating Hillary Clinton. Whether you're a Trump supporter, whether you're a Bernie supporter, whether you're somebody who's usually disengaged from politics, I think everyone has a gut level feeling of hatred towards Hillary Clinton. You don't have to know about the millions of dollars she stole from Haiti. You don't have to know about the crimes of the Clinton Foundation, Clinton Global Initiative, and all the quid pro quo she does. You don't even have to know about Libya and the way that she destroyed it, and her role as Secretary of State in being, a warmonger, and just all of the crap she and Bill Clinton have been up to throughout their, horrendous careers. You don't even have to know those particulars to have that gut level reaction to her that so many people have. So many people don't know those particulars, but they know that they hate that woman. And that is something that I think literally unites the whole country. That's why Trump is a president, is because I have never seen more people united than I do when she tweets, goes on TV, or says anything, because the whole of Twitter is just nothing but puking gifs. We all hate her. So that's how it is. And I think that's the honest. I think that the establishment has really, how do you say it? Like, she's the embodiment of them in a way that you do not have to be politically educated to understand, if that makes sense. Like,
that's
she's
spot
the
on.
Figurehead. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's in the same way that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the face of corruption within the DNC, and you don't get something like a Debbie Wasserman Schultz, or you don't get a President Trump without Hillary Clinton or something like her being universally recognized as contemptible.
Right. Exactly. You don't get a President Trump unless you have somebody as cancerous as Hillary Clinton running against him. That's it. I don't, and that doesn't mean that there weren't people who would have supported Trump anyway, but he wouldn't have won if it hadn't been Hillary Clinton running against him. There's no question.
Absolutely.
If it had been Barack Obama, it wouldn't have been a contest. It wouldn't have even been a contest. And I'm not even a fan of Obama, but that's a fact.
Oh yeah, no, you're right, and it's a testament to just how craven her handlers are, and how just bootlicky and sycophantic her circle is, that they would allow her to believe that it was her turn. You know, just the historical statistics alone show that when you've had 8 years of one party, you more often than not switch to the other party. And
Bush, Obama, absolutely.
Yeah. And the anomaly being Bush's father, who was president from 1980 to 1992. Man, I'm glad that guy's dead.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he was a piece of work.
Can't undo what he did, but I'm glad he's not here to do more of it. And I've made the argument before that we really have had 40 years of unfettered Bush cabal rule. Because Bill Clinton, blood relative, one, but two, man, the only reason he got to become president is because he worked for George H.W. Bush by allowing CIA planes to run cocaine through Mena, Arkansas. If
you look at the Clinton dynasty and the Bush dynasty as two faces of the CIA dynasty, I think that is pretty I think that's pretty honest. I think that's a fair way of looking at it.
Yeah, well, since the Kennedy murder, we've basically had CIA control of all branches of government and the vast majority of media.
Well, and you get called a conspiracy theorist for saying that, but I think that it is factually evident. I don't think that that's a conspiracy theorist. Facts are not conspiracy theories; they are facts, and I think that there is enough factual evidence out there for that. It's kind of something you have to figure in when you're discussing politics. And whether it's Trump changing his tune on WikiLeaks, whether it's, why is Hillary Clinton being dredged up from the grave again to run? All of that, I think, you have to figure all of that in when you're talking about that. And I think that's also why you see Joe Biden, as dementia riddled as he is. I think that's why they've been even remotely trying to run him as a front runner, is because, again, he has the same ick reaction from most people. He cannot help but walk around with his foot in his mouth if he's not creeping on women and children. But yet they are trying to run him as a front runner. Why? Because he has the same type of political power, political connections that Hillary does. He is about as close as they can get to Hillary as far as length of time to make those connections. And then secondarily, you have Elizabeth Warren, you have Kamala Harris, and some others who would be happy bootlickers, but they are not entrenched in those connections and those circles the same way Hillary and then Biden are.
I feel like out of all of the people running, the person who is most tied to and entrenched with that system, aside from Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, is Pete Buttigieg.
That's true.
And that has more to do with his, I am a perfect lab-created CIA Democrat than any time he's actually spent in office. But you don't go from your Jesuit private school from, kindergarten to 12th grade to Harvard to McKinsey, and then your only other job until you're elected mayor of South Bend is naval intelligence officer, which you still are as candidate Pete Buttigieg, active duty Naval Reserve intelligence officer, without being exactly what they had in mind when they decided to make CIA Democrats, like allow them to be a thing that was, open and running for office.
Right. Well, and the phenomena of CIA Democrats goes back a long ways. I mean, Gloria Steinem was working with the CIA. She admitted that openly later on. I mean, it's been a long running history, and if not working is, then a lot of times, when it comes to real movements by the people, whether it's civil rights or the feminist movement, any of those types of natural, actually organic movements, they will be infiltrated by the FBI and other intelligence interests. So I'm saying that to give context to the current CIA Democrat kind of phenomena, which is, again, it's kind of like part of a larger historical context. And I think that it's kind of like the relationship between intelligence and politics, just like intelligence in the media, is coming out of the closet more and more. You have people that are overtly, working with or for intelligence agencies or the military or other aspects of, the kind of unelected power structure right there on television, spouting propaganda to you. They don't even tell somebody else to do it for them. They're right there on television with their names and their, offices and all of that right there proudly. They're not even hiding it anymore. And so I think that is an element of what we see with the CIA Democrats, where you have, military intelligence, former military intelligence running all over the place as Democrats. And my question is, what's liberal about that? What's liberal about the CIA? I don't understand.
It's a very diverse way to fuck over the population. Maybe they all use, reusable grocery bags.
Well, it's like they're just cutting out the middleman. I mean, they're not really even bothering to like have somebody in office they go to and whisper in the ear. They're just running themselves now. I mean, it's like I mean, we're just getting to that point where they don't care about appearances anymore. I think that's my takeaway from it, is that they don't care about appearances either because they feel the propaganda is so entrenched, or because they feel that the middle class is so dead and the working class is so, hand to mouth, unable to rise up against them, that they just don't really care to hide anymore. It's kind of like a level of confidence is what it suggests to me.
You're not wrong. And I mean, it goes back to the consent has already been manufactured. And in my opinion, if it wasn't 100% manufactured by the time they wrote the Patriot Act, then before the ink was dry on it, we had reached 100% manufactured consent. And as you mentioned, I mean, we've got, intelligence officers, people directly tied to the Pentagon or directly tied to an individual branch of the military who are analysts and experts. And I gotta say, like, as the further that we go into we live in a cartoon, like, the further we go into the cartoon, the less I like and trust someone who is billed as an expert. If it smells like marketing, I'm going to be less inclined to believe that expert. If it's someone who you can verify their work through, legitimate life experience, scope determines relatability. Like, there's people who I would consider experts who don't bill themselves as such. Do you know what I mean?
Well, so for example, like Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, yes, they come from intelligence services, but most of them are either whistleblowers or, like in the case of Ray McGovern, he gave back his medal in protest, of the Iraq War situation. So they have some level of integrity. There's a reason that you maybe listen to whereas you wouldn't listen to Clapper going on MSNBC. So, but I think that it's also, how do you say it? Like you said, the further the further we go into this cartoon, the less you are inclined to believe anyone of authority, no matter where they're from. I think that's a really interesting point. In one of the recent episodes of SND Live, we had on Nozomi Hayase to talk about WikiLeaks, because it was right after the Assange hearing in October, and everyone, of course, was rightfully horrified. And Nozomi gave one of the most inspiring and interesting talks I've heard for a long time in independent media. And again, shameless plug, go watch that episode with her. Go watch the individual discussion with her, because it's amazing. And it's not because of me, it's because of her. She's amazing. But she talks about, because she went into the process of becoming an academic. She's done liberation psychology, was in the academic world, and instead of becoming a clinical psychologist like she thought she would, she got into talking about WikiLeaks, and she did her dissertation on WikiLeaks. And the idea that something like WikiLeaks comes outside of the system and shows how the system is corrupt and not working. And the reason that her talk is so brilliant and what she said was so important was that it had nothing to do with, but it was less about, oh, the CIA is doing bad things, and more about, how is academia supporting this power structure? How are these professional classes being trained to support the systems of power that already exist? And how are they even unconsciously becoming instruments of propaganda? So, for example, if I'm in a university class, I'm not going to go to the professor and say, hey, but you're wrong because WikiLeaks. Because I'm going to not get a passing grade, and I'm not going to, blah, blah, blah. So, and as, as somebody who's, gotten a bachelor's degree, I can really genuinely see what she's talking about, because I thought I was going to go to a master's program in a certain topic. And I realized that, talking about the medieval understanding of the use of a spoon didn't sound like it was going to be the most productive, use of my time. And so I thought, and you see something like WikiLeaks and you realize how fucked those systems of power are. And the degree, and so my very long-winded point is to say that academic institutions are, and not just academia, but that's the one that I think I want to focus on, are just as much instruments of propaganda as the media, but they're almost more insidious, because you and I and everyone else will sit here all day and we'll talk about how the media is propagandizing us, how the CIA goes on media, and that's valid. It's important. It's one of the most obvious ways that it happens. And we can talk about Cambridge Analytica propagandizing via social media, but media, whether it's social media or whether it's cable TV, is the obvious outlet of that propaganda. Academia and professional institutions, things like that, are the invisible kind of pillar of that propaganda. It's one of the more insidious ways that we get propagandized that we don't talk about as independent journalists, because it's not, we're always, our head is always in the media, what's going on in the news cycle. But academic institutions it's that invisible backbone. It's the silent backbone of all of this. And it's the way that you get journalists like, Anderson Cooper coming on, with his background or whatever, and saying, oh, well, this is what the establishment tells us today. And as you say, journalists cite experts. Where do those experts come from? They come from academia, or, on and on and on and on. So I think, it basically, her discussion really opened my eyes to the way in which there are these other undergirders of the system of power that reinforce themselves, and it's kind of like a rebounding, boomeranging mechanism between the media, between academia, and back and forth, and all of that. So
that's fucking incredible. And I'm sure she is amazing. Give yourself a little credit. You can be like kind of amazing. You're like approaching amazing. You're fucking amazing too. Cynthia McKinney has talked at length about how academia has become the new home of COINTELPRO.
That is a great way of putting it. And I have huge respect for Cynthia, and she's one of my idols for sure.
Oh yeah, so I voted for her in 2008, and I have voted for her for president since. Like I've written her.
She's one of the best politicians that ever graced the halls of Congress, in my opinion. So.
Absolutely. I had her on the show back in January, I think, and it was we were getting fucked with so hard on the stream. Like we could do a countdown, and then she could start talking again, or I could start talking. Like that's how bad it was. It was gnarly. And we were kind of joking on the Free Assange Vigil the other day that we were getting the Consortium news treatment because
Right.
our stream was just hit super hard, and we went out of our way to promote it, and it was the first time that we asked other
Exactly.
people.
See, that's when we would have trouble too with Consortium. It'd be a really important stream, you know, and we
Yeah.
would do everything we could to prevent any sort of technical problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we got the like highest possible internet speed you can get on Andrew's end as the tech director, and the entire night, like, it was unstable connection. He couldn't have anything else open. He couldn't pull up an article to share it with lit, and still just, oh, it was rough. But back to academia, some professors feel like it's their job, their patriotic duty, and God's will to make sure people walk out ready cogs in the machine. You know,
Right.
the idea that they're building minds is secondary to the programming that those minds receive. And
Right.
my mom was a college professor at a private Christian university in Anderson, Indiana. And it's a church-dominated town. And the Church of God that owns the university is the dominant church in that town. The Church of God is Pentecostal. Not snake-handling Pentecostal, but more like slightly mainstream Pentecostal. I don't think
Still
that,
intense.
yeah.
Still intense.
They have a week-long thing called camp meeting, and it's basically a giant fucking tent revival where people from all over the world come and park on the college campus, and there's RVs and shit. And when I was growing up, it was like where we met girls. But, you know, putting it in perspective of just how freaky it is, it's, you know, it's for me to be raised in that town and come out the way that I did with how involved my parents were in both the university there and the church there, it is, that's my, you said something earlier about my reaction to authority. Like, I've always had that reaction to just this visceral emotional hatred of, you know,
Right. Yeah.
what
Corrupt
authority
power.
represents to me, and the church was definitely an example of that. But I told you that story to get back to the point about academia, because I watched it happen within the context of a religious university, and how the indoctrination through the professors was both, you need to become this particular kind of grown-up, but it was also spun very heavily, you know, ministerial as well. And so I have some first-person experience of that, because I you know, grew up there. They had the good library. My mom taught there. I could go and use the good library. I ended up like grading a lot of her papers my junior and senior year of high school. I was grading freshman English papers and not getting fucking paid for it, and she was a goddamn capitalist. At any rate, but I saw how the professors operated. I saw, you know, and I saw and I saw how hypocritical they were after the fact. But no decision was made by a lot of these fools that wasn't fully backed by an agenda, and it was a shared agenda. Like, they weren't imposing their personal particular beliefs on them. They were reinforcing both the state and the church and making sure that there was no separation.
Wow. Incredible. I don't have that kind of experience with family members being in a position of being a professor. But when you're speaking about that, it reminds me of it, or it made me think of the fact that if you think about the population of any country is the most important to propagandize the most heavily, if you are interested in controlling that population, it would be the middle class. So, if you have enough money to go to college, then I think that the state would probably brand you middle class, right? And I know most people that now go to college are deeply in debt, and that there's a whole other discussion. But essentially, like, those are the people that might have enough bread in their kitchen and enough time on their hands to cause trouble if they wanted to. So I think those people are the ones that are most targeted by propaganda. And see, that's what's so interesting is I see over and over and over again highly educated people buying into Russiagate, being the most propagandized group that I see, period, are the ones with the most degrees behind their name. And that is really interesting to me. So I think, so that idea of propaganda in academia, I think, is really important. And it doesn't have to be the specific idea that is propagandized that is important. So, for example, it's not as if the people that have those multiple degrees were sitting in school doing the dissertation on how Putin is evil and Russia is terrible and we should believe all that crap. But it's the dynamic that they're taught to take, like because they become they feel powerful because they're part of that system of power that gave them those degrees. So therefore, they trust other experts that are part of positions of power. So they're going to trust the Comeys and the Clappers and the people from other systems of power. And I think that's what Nozomi was saying that was so powerful to me. It's the way that one area of power in academia then supports another area of power, like in the military, and then another area of power in journalism and the media, and what experts will tell us in the media. And so it's this round robin, and it's this, like I said, resonating boomeranging effect. And I think that my most central point in bringing that up is just that academia is kind of invisible. We don't talk about it the way that we talk about the media and the military and politics.
You're absolutely right.
Academia is kind of invisible in the background.
And academia is one of the few places that offers institutional security.
Right.
Exactly. We if you're comfortable in your environment and the system that allowed you to be comfortable in that environment is threatened, or perceived to be threatened, whether it's in the form of Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump or Antifa or the fucking Cincinnati Bengals having a winning season, or like whatever's there, they are going to full-throated defend that system because and they're not going anywhere. They can stay and instill the belief in that system on hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of students throughout the next, raising entire generations of good little robots,
Yep. Well, there are a few. I mean, there are always a few professors that do teach critical thinking skills, or that do teach, students to use their minds rather than just shut it into a little box and put a stamp on it that says state approved. But they're few and far between. There's not enough of them. And honestly, those people are doing a service to the population. It's more like they're following a calling rather than, actually getting anywhere. And those people are usually either fired or they're not promoted. And it's the same way people in politics who go in with real good intentions are not. They don't get into the system of the holds of power. They are, like Cynthia McKinney, who mentioned earlier. She got into Congress, but she was very quickly, sabotaged and thrown out as soon as she stood up and literally spoke truth to literal power.
Yeah. The moment after she demanded the 9/11 inquiry, that she was set for primary. She talked about that a little bit. Yeah. But I mean, even the way that she was treated as a Green was severe by everyone, particularly people in the Democratic Party. And it's hard for people to remember, but Cynthia McKinney was savaged in a way that Jill Stein never was, by no one more than like the good little people at Daily Kos.
Exactly. See that, and that is why Cynthia McKinney is my idol, because I think of her as almost like a. I mean, she's technically not a whistleblower, but she has that kind of role in my mind because she stood up to so much abuse, institutional abuse, personal, the whole thing.
Not only
And she was
stood up, but
really
in at
attacked.
least one case punched back.
Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, no, Cynthia literally, like, she's an inspiration. Period. Like, one of the first articles I wrote were in independent journalism was about DynCorp and her speaking to Donald Rumsfeld about DynCorp. And literally, I mean, like, I'm just a random kid with an English degree who decided to start using my voice as an independent journalist. I didn't go to journalism school. I didn't know, nobody said, "Oh, Elizabeth, why don't you say something?" I just did it. And I think that Cynthia, the way that she used her voice is inspirational in that sense. It's like,
Yeah.
just like, that's the thing that people that, and I don't think I would have become an independent journalist unless Bernie Sanders had been cheated, unless it was like, well, nobody else is going to do this for us, so we have to take it on ourselves to do it. And so, like, there are people, and there are brilliant people on Twitter with brilliant minds, and I keep telling them, where, like, and I'm going to name a name, like Curry Dobson.
Oh
Who's
yeah, absolutely.
brilliant. And I keep telling him, you need to write a blog. You need to actually take that and use your voice in a place where, A, if your Twitter account gets suspended, you're not going to be memory hold. But B, because what you're saying has value. You can, that voice shouldn't be just, oh, on Twitter. People want to hear that and read it. So I think people out there, there are so many. I'm not uniquely, anything. I'm just using my voice, and I wish more people would. I think it needs to be more. The more the merrier. Not like competition between independent media. I really wish more people would stand up and do that and see that their voice and that they have power in and of themselves. And that's something that I said 1,000 times on the Assange vigil. Sorry, on the Unity 4J vigils, is that people underestimate themselves so much. And it doesn't have to be like, if you don't feel like words are your strength, that's fine. Do something that is your strength. But there are people out there. I know there are people out there that have brilliant minds, words brilliantly, and should be writing. And I hope that more people do.
Yeah, fuck, yeah, absolutely. I think the very first Free Assange vigil that we did, we said our stated goal is to become irrelevant.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Exactly.
And with that in mind, like, it's frustrating. Like, it's hard, dude. It is to just it's hard to not walk away from it feeling like you're preaching to the choir the entire time. And I love that I was asked to co-host the show, and I do love doing and being a part of it and in the moment. And for shits and giggles on Halloween we dressed up, and I dressed up like George Galloway, and that was fucking fun, But
Yeah.
but man, the the particular type of outreach and the people that we need to be reaching, like, I guess the vigils are more of a way to express solidarity and deliver calls to action, and it's the activism that we all do afterwards and before and after that is where the impact is. But yeah, we just found out there's a couple of people in Australia that would like to start an action for Assange Australia, and that step towards irrelevancy has been made, and I feel good about that in that aspect. On this show, I would prefer not to become irrelevant. I
Of
kind
course.
of
Well, I
enjoy
think,
it.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think there's anything that will. I mean, independent media is not going to become irrelevant moving forward. It's definitely going to continue to become more relevant. I think that it's sad to see the amount of suppression of your channel. That, I mean, the way that your channel has been suppressed really angers me, because I think it's fantastic. I think you guys put a lot of effort into it, and I think it looks like a channel with 100,000 plus viewers minimum. And
Aw.
I think that independent media, although it is being suppressed, will become more powerful. I think that's the one thing that the state and the powerful, that are part of that unelected power structure really do fear. And I think that's why there's that hysteria about Russian trolls and Russian bots and Russian, hacking of social media. It's not because they actually have any fear of Russia. It's because they have a fear of the public. They have a fear of us and people like what you're doing, what Consortium News has been doing, and all independent media, all collectively have been doing. And that is, going back to the academia, we're not state approved. We didn't come from journalism courses and classes, and we don't have to, and we're not, Brittany the Weather Girl. We're not, coming at it from that supported state sanctioned place. And that terrifies them, that we're just random people who have voices and are daring to use them.
Yeah.
That scares the crap out of them. And you know how I know? Because they have things like the Integrity Initiative that are out there just to smear, to come after this type of thing. I was smeared by people that were associated with that. Anybody, Max Blumenthal being arrested for, the situation in Venezuela. You have so much, but although that's, obviously like an Orwellian crackdown on free press, it also is a demonstration of how vulnerable they feel about it. I think and to an extent, that's the same thing you can say about Assange. As far as, obviously he with WikiLeaks, they exposed evidence of war crimes, so it's of magnitude 1,000 times, more impactful than, most of the rest of us could ever hope to be in our entire lifetimes. But the point being that was another outsider, and that's what Zumi was saying in the interview, that WikiLeaks is an outsider organization. It's an outsider journalism that is exposing the systems of power, and that terrifies these people. And so in a smaller degree, that's what all independent media is doing. It's coming from the outside, it's criticizing power. And so in that sense, it is making a very real difference, I think. Because, where else could conversations like this happen?
Yeah, no,
you're going to see that.
You're right about that. I have this, I get a little bit heated about it, that so much of independent media is people pointing a finger at the mainstream media saying this is bullshit, but all of their content, all of their baseline content is mainstream content. And
right.
and at the end of the day, 99% of them are all telling you to vote for the Democrat in the 2020 primary, that you like, they're all reinforcing the system. They're all playing within the confines of the narrative to a degree. And that right. degree varies a lot. You've got TYT, who is the narrative, and then
yeah, I don't count them as independent media. I'm sorry.
No, neither do I. Yeah. Neither do I. Whenever the few times that I've tweeted about Cenk Uygur, I've referred to him as cable news on the internet guy. But there are people who are truly independent who do fantastic work, and we talk about them a lot on this show. But then there's also, like, my channel is 99% horse race. My channel, if I interview people, I'm going to interview people who are trying to run within the system as a reform candidate, when all of them will privately or even in different streams admit that reform within the Democratic Party is a fucking fool's errand.
Right.
And and the self-censorship that takes place is out of fear of lost income. Like, when we monetized thought, when we put it out on these platforms, we saw the money before the consequences, or I think
that's
a lot
a brilliant point.
And now there's a YouTube creators union, but I don't know a whole lot about it. The guy who started the Slingshot channel formed it, and it's backed by Germany's oldest union, the world's oldest union. I need to look into it a little bit more. But But where we are is people are afraid to say Julian Assange's name in their shows. They're afraid to uh, put it in the title of their videos. They're unwilling to a degree to talk about it, as a guest on other people's shows. You probably have to scat, huh?
Well, in about like 15 minutes, yeah.
Okay.
But not immediately.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to keep talking a little bit. But yeah, I think that that's a really good point about monetizing thought. I think that it's a brilliant point, and I'm having to sit here and kind of contemplate it for a second. And that is, because I want to add that I'm not. I mean, independent people that are in independent media obviously come from as many diverse backgrounds, places, and personal histories as there are people in it. I mean, everybody comes at it from a different perspective. I know for me, I was not thinking about making any income when I started to write. And that's not like some sort of altruistic thing. I just didn't expect it. It was just something I wanted to do because I wanted to use my voice. Phone's ringing, apologies for that. But it's just, it wasn't something that was intended to be a profit-making enterprise for me. It was just, I'm just going to mute myself while the phone rings. But yeah, please talk more about that point, about the monetization of thought, because I think it's really important.
All right, so what, and it's something that the audience may recognize, but we've all probably watched a content creator or two or three run down the list of their videos that have been demonetized, or Graham Elwood was doing a live stream that had ads disabled during the live stream, and mentioned that, and that's it's not just a form of censorship, but it's a reflection of how we've all allowed these platforms to operate, and it's an extension of centralization, which is something that I am not a big fan of. I talk about decentralized activism all the time, and moving towards a decentralized society that has a completely different definition of work and how to spend your time. But since we are where we are, independent media has the obligation going into the next presidential election, or whoever winds up running, being the puppet in the White House, that to a degree helps steer the legislation that they were hand delivered by the national security state. We have an obligation as independent content creators to really push for our own agency, our own networks, our own way to broadcast that that actually allows us to continue on with what we're doing, because net neutrality is fucked. Free press is on the line in the form of Julian Assange. We can talk all day long about, whether or not the Ukrainian whistleblower is a whistleblower, but that individual is going to get has already received more protection than Chelsea Manning or Jeremy Hammond. Or way more than John Kiriakou did. Like, there's countless people who have paid significant, severe, up to ultimate price for speaking truth to power. And if we can't find a way to, collectively claim a share of this media space that allows us to operate freely, then yeah, as important as independent media is now and will become in the future, we have a lot of uphill battles to fight in terms of getting our voices out to the right people. And I'm glad that we're all on a journey, because, someone like Jimmy Dore has 600,000 subscribers. Joe Rogan's got 10 million subscribers. But my hope is that they're recognized as a step along the way. you know, and
Right.
and people just don't get too comfortable in that space, because it happened with TYT, and you have a lot of people thinking that there's no way that, you know, even if they left TYT, they're still thinking there's no way that Bernie Sanders could ever possibly be fucked with the way he was fucked with in 2016.
Yeah. No, I think that it's really interesting though that there are some, and you know, obviously I'm not going to like throw mud at people, but there, and I'm not thinking, and this is not within the progressive sphere. There are some people in independent media who I know self-censor, primarily because of finances, and I think that that is really sad, because I think that it means that you sacrifice really good stories, and I think that you know but eventually what that becomes is it becomes something where the people watching you or reading your work, they know there's a gut level, they know you're holding back, or they know that you're not really giving the whole story. And I think that does affect people eventually. And again, I'm not talking about progressive media here. I'm talking about, you know, outside of that. But you know,
I can think a couple of people in progressive media that have specifically mentioned self-censoring. You know?
Well, I think, see, there's a difference between, like, for example, not saying a swear word on air because it'll get you censored on YouTube advertising. Like, that doesn't, that to me, that's not the type of self-censoring that's really concrete and material to covering stories. But when it comes to covering stories a certain way, I think that's really dangerous territory for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and this is specifically in terms of talking about Julian Assange on their show. Like we've actually had a couple of people, you know, flat out be like, I can't discuss this. I can't put this in my video. I can't, you know, because if I do, I lose money. And if you give a damn about your ability to make money in the future in the outlet that you've chosen to make money, you should probably start advocating for a fucking free press and the freedom of Julian Assange like yesterday, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's not only is it selfish to not cover a story like that, it's definitely, as you say, it's against self-interest long term. And this is a very random like segue, but I wanted to just say before I do leave, and I mentioned this once on one of the vigils, but I just, for some reason throughout this conversation, I've been really wanting to just mention it. That is, in addition to the media, in addition to academia, in addition to everything else that propagandizes us, you know, information that we don't think is relevant to politics or the state is really drenched in propaganda as well. So, like, if you look at really long-running TV shows, and not individual ones, but all of them, like, how many TV shows are there out there that focus on law enforcement as the people that you're empathizing with? You know,
I've said before on the show that fucking
Law and
NCIS.
Order, NCIS. Or how many? I mean, you can list. There's like 15 of them. Okay, so how many shows are there that talk about, that show victims of police brutality as the main person in the TV show? There's none. So what I'm saying here is that, and it's not just about law enforcement, i.e. police, it's also intelligence and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Point being that all we are shown on those shows is how police are doing their best, and, you know, they really hesitate to prosecute people, and when they do, there's all these things hamstringing them, and, you know, like, oh, you know, the really, you know, awful defense lawyer got stuff thrown out improperly. I mean, it's like always the system as empathized with, you know, on the part of, like, we're shown the system from the perspective of, you know, police officers, prosecutors, you know, so add lawyers to the mix, you know, all of that. We're not shown it from the perspective of the people that are victimized by that system of power. But also, in addition to that, just the flat out perspective of it, it's also shown in such a way that looks like that system of power is operating properly, and is, you know, like as if there are checks and balances, like there are prosecutors who care about the guilt or innocence of these people, where, you know, in reality, it's a completely different monster. It's a completely different situation. And so I think recognizing that degree of saturation of propaganda is important as well. And I mean, maybe a lot of the viewers watching this already, you know, can recognize that. But I think, again, I think the reason it was important for me to just bring that up was because, like academia, it's kind of a silent, sort of semi-invisible form of propaganda, because it's not directly talking about which political candidate you should vote for. It's not directly talking about which legislation you should support, which party, blah 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 blah. But it's showing you it's a very direct, it's a very intentional view of what reality is, about how the state functions, about how power works, you know, and et cetera, and on and on and on. And so it's aimed at having us form a particular view of the actual power structures in this country.
And it's you're so fucking right, dude. I watched a little bit of the Jack Ryan series because
Right.
it had the
That's
dude
another
from
one.
The Office in it, and I was like, why the
Yeah.
fuck is the guy from The Office comic book hero, you know? Okay, I'll bite. And then what, I don't know, if I can't remember if it was the second or the third season, but they went straight to Venezuela. And like, holy
Right.
shit,
CIA
Venezuela!
propaganda. Yeah, exactly.
Maddening. NFL halftime shows are a giant military recruiting commercial.
Oh, don't even get me started on video games being military recruitment.
It's what they
well.
want in warfare now. Is, you know, little kid drone operators who fucking went from video game to video game when are completely disassociated from the fact that they are murdering motherfuckers out there.
Well, and even Assange said that about collateral murder after it came out. He was saying directly that those pilots on the tapes were using language as if it was a video game, word for word. That's what Assange said. Even back then in 2010, that phenomena was already happening out on the field. Already, you know, that type of dynamic was already happening. I mean, the video took place years earlier, I think in 2007. So it's already, you know, entrenched. It's already happening. But yeah, I think so. Again, those things are not separate from politics or from all of the other things that we're talking about. And so I guess my overall point is that propaganda as a word and as a concept is not limited to politics. It's not limited to, you know, CNN and MSNBC. It's not limited to newspaper articles. It's everywhere. Yeah.
Absolutely right. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I always enjoy it when you're on the show. Please tell the folks where they can find you, including here in, you know, a couple hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, the, ladies and gentlemen and everything in between, the absolutely brilliant Elizabeth Voss.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. I really like this this format discussions. I think they're great. I think it's really unique. And you can find me on Twitter at Elizabeth Leavos. You can find my writing mostly at Consortium News, but I also publish on Steemit and at a couple other independent outlets once in a while. You can find me on Facebook. Just, you know, look for my name, Elizabeth Voss, and on basically every other alternative media site out there, whether it's Gab, MeWe, Minds. Like, I'm on all of them, so you can find me there as well. But in a few hours, you can find me at CN Live. It's on the Consortium News YouTube channel. We'll be live streaming. We do it every Friday at 8 to 10 Eastern. So thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, and I'm Steve Poikinen, and this has been Slow News Day, and good luck to us all.
We will need it.